Shabbat Shalom and a sweet new year. This is weird. I mean, where is everybody? You know, I usually try to start the first sermon on the high holidays with a joke. But this is awkward, you know, like every athlete, politician, musician, late night comic, we rabbis play off the crowd, and I get my energy from you, and now there's no reaction. There'll be no way for me to affirm that what I'm about to say was or is a good joke. And then there's the fact that this year has hardly been a laughing matter. You know, the Hebrew name, the letters for 5781, the year we've just entered, it says it all. Taf Shin Pei Aleph. If you toss around these letters, you get the word ashpot, a garbage heap. Literally, in the Bible, a pile of dung. You know, the gate right just outside the western wall is called Sha'ar HaAshpot, the dung gate. It's where they carried out the residue of those animals brought up to the Temple Mount for sacrifice. So even the name of the year tells us that we are experiencing a dung show of biblical proportions. This year has been a dung stir fire. Okay, so here goes the joke. A rabbi, priest, and minister walk into a bar, and it's closed. That laughter sounded great. So how are we really feeling today, you know? Fearful, sad, angry, hopeful, bereft, all that, I'm sure. We're going to talk about these feelings, these experiences over the next 10 days. You know, I've been leading services on the high holidays since I was 17, but never anything like this. I look out and no one is here. I miss you more than you could ever imagine. I mean, everything has been thrown out of whack. Everything is gone. Lord and Taylor, Fairway, United House wrecking. You can't even wreck a house anymore. Brooks Brothers, Mookie Betts and Tom Brady. In Boston, even Cheers closed. Now no one knows my name. This is me. Free-floating anxiety. On the other hand, I see you out there. I know that you're out there. And yet, despite all the bewilderment and confusion, never have we also felt so anchored, so laser-focused. It's a paradox. Even as our world has been turned upside down, we've regained our moral bearings. Even as we've been tossed around like yesterday's dung, all the while we've been purifying ourselves, body and soul, like the high priest preparing for Yom Kippur. So as disoriented as we've been, in some ways we've also been stabilized. Now ask me today's date and I'll hesitate. But ask me what happened on May 25th for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and I'll know exactly what you're talking about. At any moment, we feel like we're floating from virtual background to virtual background on Zoom, but on May 25th at 7:57, our moral compass positions us adjacent to a car just across the street from Cup Foods in Minneapolis, the spot where George Floyd's life was snuffed out, and the moment when everything changed. Now, later assessments indicate it might have taken over 9 minutes from start to finish, and he was probably dead for the last 2 or 3 of them, the most difficult to watch. But however long it took for that one precious life to be extinguished, it was the most impactful footage of a murder since the Zapruder film, and it was, and for all time will remain, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It's now a part of history. And with all the perplexity of this COVID period, those 526 seconds stand out because they lifted a cloud that has been suffocating this country for 401 years. In fact, our world was already way off kilter long before someone ate a bat on the other side of the world and set off a pandemic last year. But we were too busy to notice. Once the lockdown set in, however, we had time to notice. We had time to focus on what is important in life. Lots of things, and I'll get to some of the others over the next 10 days. But perhaps first and foremost, we had time to focus on those 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And we had time to understand that George Floyd's life mattered. And we began to regain our moral bearings as Americans, and to finally come to fully understand the enormity of the sins of our fathers and mothers, and turns out ours as well. All of ours, because we own it all. We are responsible. And we began to see the racism in ourselves. We began to look around and see so many people suffering, people of all colors and creeds. And we cried out with a sense of recognition that we never had before, seeing injustice with a clarity that we never had before. We cried out that all human beings deserve to live lives of dignity, including and especially those who have been so cruelly denied it. This is the year America finally began to understand what it's like to live in someone else's skin. And this was the year for a reason. Nicole Hannah-Jones wrote in the New York Times, "Colossal society ruptures have been the only thing potent enough to birth transformative racial change in this country. And perhaps a viral pandemic colliding with our nation's 400-year racial one has forced that type of rupture today. Maybe it had to be this way. This deep and collective suffering was necessary for white Americans to feel enough of the pain that black Americans have always known to tilt the scale." Or as basketball's Chris Webber put in response to the Jacob Blake shooting, echoing the sage Hillel, "If not now, when?" This past year's Book of Life had far too many tragic endings. Anyone who has a heart, anyone who is not an unfeeling monster, has felt that heart break so many times this year that there are no tears left. Over these coming days, our mission will be to try to figure out how to go on, how to move forward with confidence, how to live at a time of plague when there is so much fear, how to live at a time of isolation when so many are trying to divide us. On this Rosh Hashanah, let us begin that journey with a focus specifically on why Black lives matter and why that movement matters to Jews. On Rosh Hashanah it is determined, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed, and all days we shall know their names. Who shall die while jogging? Ahmed Arbery. Who shall die while holding a cell phone? Stephen Clark. Who shall die while decorating for a party? Claude Reese. Who shall die while leaving a party? Jordan Edwards. Who shall die while sleeping? Ayanna Jones. Who shall die after a no-knock ambush of her apartment and receiving no medical attention for 20 minutes? Breonna Taylor. Who shall die by asphyxiation and have it covered up for months? Daniel Prude. Who shall die while worshiping the Lord? The Charleston Nine. Who shall die for a traffic violation? Sandra Bland. Who shall die while coming from the store? Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin. Who shall die while shopping at Walmart? John Crawford. Who shall die while cashing a check in peace? Yvonne Smallwood. Who shall die while reading a book in their own car? Keith Scott. Who shall be shot in the back while entering their car? Jacob Blake. Who shall die while running away? Walter Scott. Who shall die while asking a question? Randy Evans. Who shall die while begging for their life? Eric Garner. Who shall die while begging for their breath? George Floyd. But teshuvah, prayer, and a complete reckoning can avert the severe decree. Back in July, I received emails from two congregants on the very same day. One asked me whether Black Lives Matter is anti-Semitic, and how, if so, could Jews feel that they are doing the right thing to support it. And the other was from someone who was considering naming her expectant child Canaan, and would that be okay? So I'm going to try to address both questions simultaneously. Because if you want to get at the root of racism, you have to begin with the Bible. And if you want to begin the process of undoing racism and becoming anti-racists, we have to find a way to reverse the curse of Canaan. Now, this mom-to-be really liked the name Canaan. After all, Oprah had named a child Canaan because, as she put it, Canaan means new land, new life. But our expectant mom knew something more. She'd been reading some of the books that a lot of us have been reading lately about the origins of racism and some verses from Genesis. You see, after leaving the ark with his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah plants a vineyard, which is survivor's instinct. He just had a near-death experience. And eventually that leads to a remarkable discovery: wine. Noah gets drunk, goes a little crazy. The text then continues, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, went outside and told his two brethren. His brothers then cover their father with a garment and look askance so as not to shame him. Another instinctive and quintessentially human endeavor to protect the dignity of a loved one, affirming his or her worth as a human being. So Noah wakes up, sees what happened, goes ballistic, and for some inexplicable reason, curses Ham's son, Canaan. Vayomer arur Canaan, eved avadim yiyah le'echav. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be unto his brethren. Noah then goes on to bless his other two sons, great parenting, and says that Canaan will be the servant of Shem. This has come to be called the curse of Ham, of Ham in Hebrew, which since the Middle Ages has been used to justify the enslavement of black Africans, since Ham was said to have inhabited that continent. In 1578, English travel writer George Best wrote that it was God's will that Ham's son and, quote, all his posterity after him should be so black and loathsome that it might be a spectacle of disobedience to all the world, unquote. In the popular imagination, blackness itself became the curse. Slavery was the byproduct. And in subsequent centuries, the curse quickly gained the sanction of the church. As Ibram X. Kendi writes in his recent books detailing the history of racism, the Bible was used as a pretext to justify the horrible things that were already happening. Exploitation came first. The biblical foundation for racist ideology came second. Kendi writes, the same Bible that taught me that all humans descended from the first pair also argued for immutable human difference, the result of a divine curse. Now, we Jews know what it's like to experience that kind of prejudice. Racism has been directed against us through biblical sources too. Though I must emphasize that the degree of systemic racism that blacks face in this country is far more ingrained here even than anti-Semitism, which is found mostly on the fringes. Jews cannot possibly begin to understand what it's like to send children out the door under constant fear that they will not return home, of their being arrested, or worse. I suppose there are, like members of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, who might have something to say about that, but there still is no comparison. Exactly 2 months from tomorrow, Americans will celebrate the 400th anniversary of a journey that ended in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Now, there's some debate as to whether any Jews were on the Mayflower, but I doubt it. Nor, for that matter, would any Jews have arrived in Port Comfort, Virginia, on the first slave ship just 1 year earlier in 1619. We didn't arrive on any of those boats because we were pretty busy at the time. In 1615, we were kicked out of France, King Louis XIII. In 1618, in Poland, Jews were accused of blood libel and nearly expelled from there. Now, the blood libel, for those who don't know it, you should Google it. It's important. It stated it was a false conspiracy theory, stating that Jews consumed the blood of Christian children in a satanic pre-Passover ritual. This big lie, by the way, has modern relevance in that it is the anti-Semitic precursor to the QAnon conspiracy. The only difference between classic blood libel and QAnon is that the current conspiracists have exchanged matzah for pizza. This blood libel canard would go on to inspire anti-Jewish riots across Poland that year and in 1619, and the persecution of Jews intensified throughout Europe and beyond, even as far as Persia that year. So we were busy while those two ships made their historic journeys that, to this day, define different visions of American history. I once saw the great John Lewis of blessed memory speak to a group of college students. The shared suffering of the civil rights era rang out to me when Lewis concluded his lecture by saying, "We may have come over in different ships, but now we're all in the same boat." And Lewis was right. We're all in the same boat. So here are a couple of things you need to know about the curse of Ham, curse of Canaan and Ham. First, even the Jewish sources that see the curse in terms of skin color, still in those sources, no value judgment is made as to which color is superior. One midrash, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, states that Noah blessed Shem by making him darker. Dark, as it says in the text, but comely. Ham was blessed too, not cursed, by being, quote, dark, like a raven. Shem was given an inheritance of the earth, and Ham the coast of the sea. And the other brother, Japhet, God made Japhet and his sons entirely white, and they got the fields and the desert as their inheritance. In this midrash, incidentally, Jews are not the white ones. They're considered descendants of Shem, Semites, dark but comely ones. The rabbis, who were Middle Eastern after all, were dark-toned and proud of it. And then there's this famous midrash, this passage based on a passage from Numbers, where Moses' siblings gossip about Moses and his relationship with what they call a Cushite woman. Now, in Hebrew, Cushite is generally translated as being of African origin, literally an Ethiopian, though here it's said to include perhaps his wife Zipporah, who was Midianite, not an Ethiopian. So let's eavesdrop on a conversation between two of the sages. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosef Haglili, asks, "Dad," he didn't really say dad, but Dad, why is Moses' wife called Zipporah? To which Rabbi Yossi replies, because if you break it down in the Hebrew, the name means tzefu or u. Look and see how beautiful this woman is, this Cushite woman. But Dad, was she really an Ethiopian? Wasn't she a Midianite? Why is she called a Cushite? Rabbi Yossi Haglili responds, just as a Cushite is exceptional in his skin color, so Zipporah was exceptional in her beauty, more so than all the women. So you can see here that the rabbinic sages literally were the originators of the expression, black is beautiful. But here's the main point. From a Jewish perspective, the curse of Ham and Canaan is not about skin color at all. As the medieval commentator Ibn Ezra reminds us, who were the Canaanites? They were the nation that Israel had to conquer in order to possess the land. They had to subjugate them, not enslave them, just take over their country. That's why the Canaanites are cursed in Genesis, to pave the way so that centuries later, the Israelites could conquer their land. The curse of Canaan was a geopolitical narrative that set the scene for what was to come later, and not just regarding the Canaanites, but also their descendants, the Hittites, the Amorites, not incidentally more modern peoples like the Palestinians. It had nothing to do with blackness or with racial inferiority or slavery, for that matter. It was about biblical conquest, not race. So if anyone asks you about the curse of Ham, it's not a Jewish thing. Just remember, Ham is not a Jewish thing. I could use the laugh track there, but it's okay. While there is a thread of chauvinism in Jewish sources, and there absolutely is, and it's troublesome, the prevailing rabbinic view is to love your neighbor. And the rabbis did not like the institution of slavery. And I'll tell you something else that's a very Jewish thing: nonviolent protest. It's emphasized numerous times in rabbinic literature. Extremist violence is wrong on all sides, but nonviolent protest is not. There's even, and this is sort of interesting, there's a medieval practice of interrupting the service, I shouldn't let you know this, as a form of protest. It's called ikuv hatfilah, delaying the prayers. If a person felt that an injustice had been perpetrated on them by specific people or by the community, they could interrupt the service before the Baruch Hu prayer or before the Torah service until, quote, justice is done them. Urgent protest is seen as superseding prayer itself. And in fact, as Abraham Joshua Heschel and Martin Luther King affirmed, protest is a form of praying with one's feet. And where does that leave us as Jews in the wake of the George Floyd moment that changed everything? It leaves us here. Black Lives Matter. And notice the micrography of the design that's on your screen with the Hebrew word lo tirtzach, the Hebrew phrase from the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not murder. Yes, Black Lives Matter, and it matters that Jews unequivocally share in this moment of activism. We can't simply be not racist. We need to be anti-racist. Some people don't like the slogan Black Lives Matter, retorting all lives matter, and it's true. Every human life is of infinite value. But we need to start with the group that has been victimized systemically for centuries, the group with the knee on the neck. What has long been implied now needs to be stated clearly. When we say Black Lives Matter, what we are really saying is Black Lives Matter too. Now, there's an interesting principle of rabbinical interpretation called a kal v'chomer. It's a tool that rabbis use. This is a classic kal v'chomer, where the lesser proves the greater. So if Black Lives Matter, if lives that have been routinely discarded like yesterday's ashpot from the temple, if Black lives really do matter, so do all those other groups who have not been so abused. It starts with Black lives because they have been the most oppressed and for the longest. But it doesn't end there. It's about changing the way people think about human dignity. Once we correct the record, once we say that Black lives are not worth just 3/5 of a value of a white life, and those are just males, then we can move on to confirming the equal value of all lives. Once we own up to the 4,743 lynchings that have taken place in this country, the stench of Jim Crow, the murders, the mass incarceration, and the systemic racism that is still rendering my neighbors' lives less valuable than mine, even with regard to COVID, we will then come to recognize that all lives have dignity, and that is what matters. That's why Jews should support Black Lives Matter. We can be and must be firm allies to our neighbors in righting the wrongs of history, and now is precisely the time to do it. It's about shared suffering and empathy. It's about John Lewis, of blessed memory, whose speech to Emory graduates rang through the Capitol rotunda while his body lay there in state, when he recalled the 3 young people who were murdered by the Klan in that fateful summer in Mississippi: James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. 2 white Jews and a non-Jewish African American, and they did not die in Vietnam, Lewis said, or in Eastern Europe, or in Central America, but right here in America, simply trying to help all our citizens participate in the democratic process. They died in America. And last January, when anti-Semitic murders shocked the nation, and this sanctuary was filled with clergy and every major politician in the state, seems so long ago, but it was this year. The African American community was here for us too. They understood that to be anti-racist is also to be anti-Semitic. And so I ask you, after what happened to George Floyd and others, how could we not be anything but completely supportive and mobilized? And let me be clear that I have great admiration for the police here in Stamford, who have been so helpful to the Jewish community during the challenging times post-Charlottesville. I'm a proud police chaplain. Here's my badge. The issue of systemic racism goes far beyond one segment of society, though police reforms are absolutely necessary. Now, I'm also aware, and a number of you have pointed out to me, helpfully, that there are some Black leaders around the country who aren't very nice about what they say about Jews. It goes both ways, I must add. You can have your Louis Farrakhan's and Mayor Kahane's. I'll take John Lewis and Elijah Cummings of blessed memory, whose youth program in Baltimore has sent over 200 teens to Israel over the past 20 years. I'll take Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with Martin Luther King. And I'll take the 18th century Talmudist Pinchas Eliyahu Horowitz, who expressed a prevailing Jewish view in this passage from his Sefer HaBrit. He wrote, "The essence of neighborly love consists in loving all humankind, all who walk on 2 legs, whatever people, whatever tongue, by virtue of their identical humanity and their civilization, builders, farmers, merchants, artisans, each serving the needs of humanity in his own way. All are interdependent and connected, like the links of a chain." The Jewish Council of Public Affairs, the JCPA, represents nearly 150 Jewish community relations councils, agencies, and denominations. This is no radical group. They're mainstream. They're as mainstream as it gets. Here's what they have written about Black Lives Matter, and this is how it, in concerning especially anti-Semitism and the state of Israel. They write, BLM's 14 guiding principles and its 2020 goals and focus, indeed its entire website, makes no mention of Israel, and neither does its platform or its 2020 legislative agenda. There are invariably some Israel critics, even anti-Semites, among those leading or supporting the fight for racial justice in this country, as there are among any comparably large group of people. But this fact should not preclude participation in the fight for equality in the U.S. JCPA believes that to counter anti-Semitism and to live out our Jewish values of equity and justice for all, that the Jewish community should not abandon the largest movement for racial justice in decades because of fear of a position taken by a small fraction also participating in that fight. Only by participating in Black Lives Matter can we effectively share our concerns about anti-Semitism, the existing call to end military aid to Israel, or any other issues that get thrown in the mix going forward. These positions do not represent the entire movement, only a small group. And I'll share the JCPA's statement in the text of the sermon that I'll be posting on my website, joshuahammerman.com. With regard to anti-Semitism, I personally have shared some concerns with our local partners regarding some statements that were made by an NAACP leader in Philadelphia who has since been removed, and our local leaders responded with all the right words of reassurance, as good friends do. Guy Fort, the local NAACP leader, spoke to our congregation earlier this summer. He wrote to me in response to my concern. He said, the Stamford branch of the NAACP finds it unacceptable that the Philadelphia chapter had leadership that engaged in anti-Semitic content and perpetuated racist sentiment. Our chapter is independent, but chooses to serve as an example for all local units and will continue to lead from the front. It is a violation of our principles to perpetuate discrimination. It is our mission to stand for equality and respect for all persons, regardless of their background. You can count on us to be consistent on this front. Not only has the leader who made offensive statements been removed, but the entire Philadelphia chapter's leadership voted to dissolve itself in the wake of this incident. This is one example of how our new Bethel Social Justice Committee has been doing some remarkable work, strengthening our partnership with the Black community. We are responding to the call of this historic moment. There are those who want to divide us, and they are primarily neither Black nor Jewish, nor, I must add, Jews of color, as ethnic classification is never binary. There are those who want to lure Jews into distrusting Blacks and other minorities. There are those who try to push the victim button that has infected Jews with fear and chauvinism. Don't fall for it. And don't let your elderly relatives fall for it. They who are the most susceptible to emotional manipulation. Share this sermon with them, wherever they live, with my compliments. Here, I'll add a little greeting. Hello, Bubby and Zadie. Good yontif. You look great, Kanahara. How's the weather? Now listen to me. The most Jewish thing we can do is embrace this moment of coming together and righting the wrongs of the past. Don't listen to the haters. And don't fall for their conspiracy theories like the fakakta QAnon. It's blood libel with pizza, and it's anti-Semitic. There are those who say that we shouldn't be talking about these matters at shul on the high holidays. To that, my response is, if not now, when? And if not here, where? I take my moral signals from those Jews who risked everything to fight against hate. Like the renowned South African anti-apartheid activist Helen Suzman and her brother, Arthur, a Jewish community leader who said in the early 1960s, "Let us cease to ask merely, is it wise to speak out, and begin to ask as well, is it just?" Our task is to arouse an awareness among our own community and to create a consensus that race relations are not exclusively a matter of politics, but concern human values." Unquote. It is our duty to speak out. And Nelson Mandela recognized that our own experience of prejudice places Jews in a unique position of moral power. We have faced anti-Semitism from all sides, from the left and from the right. By the way, there is no moral equivalence here. We know that the primary danger comes not from the black community or Black Lives Matter, but from those who killed our people at prayer in synagogues in Pittsburgh and Poway, and who killed blacks in churches in Charleston and Birmingham. These murders all have the same return address. Let's not be distracted. The Department of Homeland Security has declared white supremacy to be the most persistent and lethal threat in the U.S. through 2021. White supremacists have used the strategy of racist divide and conquer from the beginning of time, but it won't work now. Their time has run out. It ran out during those 8 minutes and 46 seconds on May 25th. In that moment, the shofar's call was heard from the flagpoles of NASCAR to the locker rooms of the Washington football team. From Fort Bragg to the NBA bubble to Aunt Jemima's kitchen. In that moment, the greatest sin of all time began at long last to unravel. Everything changed with that knee on the neck. And this stiff-necked people will rise up for justice, will rise up to repair the world. But first, before we rise up, we must take a knee in solidarity. We have our knee on racism's neck. We have our knee on the neck of hate. And if we pursue our mission with determination and love, there is nothing that white supremacists and their enablers will be able to do about it. We must all strive to become anti-racists and anti-Semites. And to do that, we must reverse the curse of Ham and turn it into the blessing of Canaan. How do we do that? That's what I'll talk about tomorrow. Amen.